friends, welcome back. It is yet another great episode of the Field and Garden podcast in the series Bug Talk with my friend Rhonda. Hi, Rhonda.
Hey, Lisa.
So if you guys haven't joined us before on one of these, Rhonda is the warehouse manager at the Gardener's Workshop, and she and I are kindred spirits because we are both like so into bugs and insects and bees and all the things that maybe 15, 20 years ago we weren't maybe so into until we got to know them a little better. And that's what this podcast series is all about, is introducing you guys to the great the great outdoors and all the workers out there that, that are out there doing a job, because, we've kind of named ourselves bug huggers, right, Rhonda?
Yeah.
So we love talking and sharing information about all these great creatures because y'all, whether you realize it or not, we are nothing without insects. So we are super happy today to have a guest with us, Dr. Barbara Abraham. Hi, Barbara.
Hello.
And she is going to talk to us about native bees today. And so let me just give just a minor little lead into this. So I think when the word bee is mentioned, most people instantly think of honeybees, which we have nothing against honeybees, y'all. But honeybees are imports. They are not native bees in our country. They need to we have to give them a place to live and care for them most often. And what we don't realize is there are thousands of other varieties of bees that truly live right outside our back door. And I am personally in love with, we have a big community of longhorn bees here on our farm, and they are the cutest, most cuddly little things you would ever want to meet. And that's what started my love affair with them. So Rhonda, what was your first meeting with native bees versus, I think so many of us think about honeybees, and it's not that we have anything against them, but the picture is much wider than that, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, bumblebees, people are familiar with bumblebees, and I guess they think honeybees, but there's so many other varieties out there. I mean, if you think of, I don't know what the common birds are anywhere else, but around here, you see a cardinal, you see a robin, and that's kind of how honeybees and bumblebees are. But there's so many other kinds of birds and bees that we just either don't recognize them as bees. They might look like wasps. They might look like flies, but they're actually bees. So there's just such a variety. And anyway, I'm glad Barbara's here to talk to us about bees. And I know she loves trees too. So she'll have, I'm sure, some things to talk about that.
Yeah. And, these are the guys that pollinate the greater world, right? So Barbara, we'll just kind of let you join this conversation. And first, I was really interested to read your story of how you chose your line of your career path. You want to tell us about that, about how you thought you might be a veterinarian, or you weren't sure which path you were going to go on? How did you come to be a bug person? I guess that's the real question here.
Well, when I went off to college, I thought I was either going to be a biology major or an English major. And I chose the biology. And then, as you said, I was interested in veterinary medicine. Well, in those days, I'm giving away my age here, but in those days, it was much more even of a male-dominated group. And so when I said I wanted to be a veterinarian, they took me into this huge barn where all the veterinary students were working on cows on these big tables. And they said to me, "Do you think you could pull a calf?" And I said, "What?" So then I decided I wanted wildlife biology. And the professor I spoke to was very nice. And he said, we're happy to have you, but you're not going to get a job when you get done because they don't want women. And so then I went to zoology and majored in zoology and got a minor in botany and one in genetics. And then when I went on for my master's, I did animal behavior working with grasshoppers. And then when I went for my PhD, I had a research assistantship but I didn't like the professor I was going to have to work with. And he was working on sagebrush defoliator moths. And that just didn't turn me on. And so I went ahead and took a teaching assistantship, which turned out very well, and studied spiders with someone who was later the president of the Ecological Society. And then I worked with spiders for 30 years. And then I was working with some students at Hampton University, where my career was mostly at Hampton University for 31 years, my full-time career. And we were building a butterfly garden. I thought this would be something the students would be interested in. It was a program through the Ecological Society. And so we built this butterfly garden, and lo and behold, the skippers loved it. But there were more bees than there were butterflies. And so that got me started with bees. I started going over to Mountain Lake Biological Station in Western Virginia, almost West Virginia, and studied bees for a few years. And then for health reasons, I had to quit that research. But I've been active at the city level with educational programs. I retired in 2016 from full-time, went over to Christopher Newport as an adjunct, and I'm still teaching basically part-time there, and working with the city of Hampton on the Bee City USA Hampton committee.
That is awesome.
Long trail.
Yeah. But you know what? I mean, isn't that the way that this all goes? I mean, so often, I mean, who would have even known back when you were in college that these things were even out there available for you to pursue, right?
Right.
So, Barbara, talk to us about the whole native bee scene. I mean, what do you say to people that aren't familiar, which, so we have a lot of listeners that are home gardeners, lots of flower farmers, people growing to sell the cut flowers, and most of them, as we try to coach them, are, pesticide free, just really doing everything they can to encourage, nature to be, to restore nature outside. So tell us what role these bees play and who they might be and how that all works.
Well, the interesting thing to me is that there are about 20,000 species of bees in the world, and they're all native somewhere. So when I say native bee in Hampton, Virginia, I'm talking about bees that are normally found in Hampton, Virginia, that they haven't been brought in to pollinate something. Certain bees like honeybees and some others that are native to the country are carried around to pollinate crops. But the ones that live here, as you said, you can have, well, Doug Tallamy has more bees than most people,
Yes.
but you can probably have 100 species of bees in your backyard. In Virginia, there are over 400 species of bees, probably 400 native, and more than that, there are a few others besides honeybees that are not native. But 77% of native bees are solitary. They don't live in colonies like honeybees. They don't interact with each other. And the interesting thing about that to the home gardener is that because honeybees are protecting a hive, they can get pretty aggressive if you're by their hive. But since native bees do not protect their nests as a rule, bumblebees may be the exception, although bumblebees don't sting. But the moral to the story is you're not going to get stung by anything unless you're being really dopey and flying your hands around, trying to get rid of them. Then, yeah, you might get stung. Or if it lands on you and you try to swat it, you might get stung. But they basically don't sting. Bumblebees do something that's really interesting called buzz pollination. And if you get close enough to them, you can hear them buzzing in order to shake the pollen out of the anthers of things like tomatoes and blueberries. And you can put your head down there to hear them, because you can't hear them from 3 feet away unless your ear is closer. They won't sting you. They're too busy doing what they're doing, and you're not anywhere near the nest. You're in the flowers, and they won't sting. So that's one of the first things I always tell people is you don't have to worry about getting stung. I mean, even if one lands on you, it's more likely to the sweat bees, will kind of lap up your sweat, but they're not going to sting you unless you mess with them. So
Back
that's
of the back of the collar. That's usually where they get me is, oh, what's on that on the back of my neck? And I go to touch it. And I think that's the last time I got stung by a bee.
Yeah, the only time I've ever been stung by a bee was a sweat bee, and it was in my collar. And it felt like a stiff tag. You know, sometimes
Mhm.
before you wash your clothes or after you wash them a couple times, the tags stick you. And the second time it happened, I woke up. But unfortunately, I was out in the field with two young male students, and I couldn't really take the shirt off to get the bee out of it. So, and I'm on the prairie, it's very flat. I couldn't hide behind anything or go around a hill. But that's the only time that I have ever been stung. So they don't tend to sting. Honeybees are much more aggressive if they're by the hive, especially.
Yeah, I have definitely found that to be true in our big, I mean, I have a big commercial garden and we have a beekeeper about, I would guess, probably 5 acres away from me. He has 19 hives and his bees spend a lot of time over here. And one of the things that I have really observed over here is, and I spend a lot of time out in our garden because we're cutting flowers, right? So probably longer than the average gardener, maybe. So we watch so much of the behaviors, and you are so right. Honeybees, particularly with certain flowers, which I would guess, this is non-scientific, I would guess that they're at the height of offering the nectar or the pollen that the bees want, because they get a little crazy. I mean, you can just see the honeybees crawling over each other to get to it, and they're really aggressive to the native bees. I mean, that's what we really have observed here on the farm, particularly giant poppy pods. Those poppy flowers that are so enormous must have so much pollen that the native bee, I mean, the honeybees really, really get quite aggressive with each other, and they'll take out, I mean, we've seen them wrestle native bees down. So that's, yeah, so I totally agree with you about the honeybee thing, that they can definitely get a little bullyish, I would describe them as, would you say?
And the interesting thing is that because they live in hives, there are so many of them. When there's something blooming, there can be 50,000 honeybees in one hive. And the native bees, of course, being more spread out, more solitary, there aren't as many of them. Many of them are smaller. And so there has been some recent research about honeybee competition with native bees, although some people still don't want to admit that it's a problem. But in particular, evidently, and this is not personal experience, but evidently people who raise large numbers of honeybees to take around, like to the almonds in California, in the off season will put the hives on public land, and they can be a serious competitor with native bees in those areas. Probably, when something like an apple orchard or an almond orchard or something is blooming, there's enough bloom going on that the native bees can still find food. But in an area, particularly if it's a drier area, desert area, for example, or a plains area, there won't be that much blooming, and there's something for them, but they're out competing the native bees, and they're not getting as much food as they would if people wouldn't put their honeybees there.
Right. That makes perfectly good sense. And go ahead, Rhonda.
I was going to say that kind of brings up the fact that honeybees, well, they live, like you said, great numbers in hives altogether and are generalists, but there are a lot of bees that are specialists on a particular plant, and that plant and the bee are codependent of each other. Both depend on each other for the next generation, really.
Another thing about that is that when a bee specializes on one or a few plants, of course, that plant is only going to be blooming at a certain time. And so the bee's life cycle corresponds to the plant's life cycle. The bee will be an adult flying around, pollinating when the plant is blooming. And that can be a very brief time, especially with the spring ephemerals like spring beauty, or something like that, where the bees that pollinate them, and climate change is messing that up. It's causing a disjunct between when the plants flower and when the bees are adults to pollinate them. So in the future, that's only going to get worse.
Wow.
Yeah, the range of plants and the range of insects, moving.
Yeah, time and space. Bumblebees, like honeybees, are very general. And I think that probably this is an adaptation for needing that pollen and nectar through the year, because of course those, well, not the bumblebee colonies, they die off. And the only thing that remains is the fertilized queens to overwinter. The honeybee colonies, of course, just keep going and going and going. But the bumblebee colonies are an annual colony, but still they are active a little bit longer, a little earlier in the spring, a little bit later in the fall than a lot of bees. So a lot of bees have, maybe a month when they're adults and flying around, and the rest of the time they're in the egg, larva, and pupal stages in the ground or in a stem.
So, Barbara, you mentioned a minute ago that, or I wasn't sure if it was you or Rhonda, maybe, about how tiny some of these little native bees can be. So give us a comparison. Like, do we have some as little as the lead on a pencil, or are they bigger than that? Or I think that helps. I think some people think all tiny bugs flying are gnats or flies.
Right, right.
So let's help describe to people what they might be seeing that in fact could possibly be a bee. A native bee.
Well, the biggest ones, of course, are the carpenter bees, and the queen bumblebees are about that size. Now, there's another non-native bee that's longer and skinnier, but the tiniest bees, I have a really great slide I stole off the internet of one of the tiny little bees on the eye of a carpenter bee. And of course, it didn't take up the whole eye. So carpenter bees are a big bee, but they're not a big animal,
Right,
so
right.
something sitting on the eye of a carpenter bee. I think Perdita is the
Perdita.
tiniest bee that we have. You got a Perdita there?
Somewhere. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, they are very, very small. You can hardly see them. And obviously that isn't going to be able to sting through your skin. Oh, and by the way, only the females sting, of course.
Wow.
Yeah, I had one land on my arm yesterday. Of course, I didn't have my phone to take its picture, but I guess it was a sweat bee. Anything that lands on me, I figure that's what it is. But it was so small. It was a little fatter than a grain of rice, but shorter than a grain of rice. And I tried to walk it up into the house, but it decided it had enough of me. So
Prefer to flower.
Yeah,
exactly.
Kind of camera shy, right?
Yeah.
So Barbara, tell us, what can people do to invite and encourage native bees, and then how to help them once you have them in your in your garden? What would be some of the things that you would encourage people to do?
Oh, that's a great question. And a lot of your audience is probably already doing 2/3 to 3/4 of it, because the main thing is probably planting the flowers, planting a variety of flowers. So you get some that those specialist bees might be specializing on, and then planting flowers that are blooming as early in the spring as you can, as late in the fall. So you have blooms through the season. So the food source is one element. A lot of people don't realize that bees need water, particularly in dry times. Honeybees, a lady around the corner from me, Rhonda knows who that is, had a beehive a couple of years ago, and we had a really dry summer. And I found my bird bath, and there were honeybees head down drinking out of the bird bath all the way around the bird bath. And the poor birds, of course, there was so much coming and going, the birds wouldn't go. So having a water source, and a lot of people say to put out shallow dish, put some rocks or something for them to stand on. I found that concrete bird bath was rough enough that they could hold on really good. And I never got them to go to any other kind of a source of water. But a source of water is important. And I think what a lot of, and not using pesticides, which you already said your people don't do, that's very, very important. But the last element of that is habitat. And 70% of bees nest in the ground, and a lot of them are too small to dig through mulch. So having some open areas for them to nest in, particularly if the soil isn't real solid clay or anything, and it doesn't have to be real big, but not mulching every square inch of your yard. The other 30% live in stems. So we need to be messy gardeners. I think it's National Geographic or Audubon or somebody that's saying leave the leaves. We don't need to only leave the leaves, because it's mostly, lepidopterans, caterpillars that have their pupae in the leaves over winter. We need to leave standing stems because these hollow, pithy stems are where a lot of bees lay their eggs, have their nests. And it's really hard for us, especially if it's in the front of your house, to leave those stems up until late spring, because some of the bees are not, they're not coming out in the winter. They're laying the eggs in the fall or even earlier, and then they're not coming out till the next spring. So we really need to leave those standing stems until late spring, so those bees can come out and not be destroyed when we clean up our gardens.
So I have a question. That was I enjoyed that so much, because let me ask you this. So are bees specific to what hollow stems they have? Because hydrangeas, which is a huge crop for everybody in the South, right? We all have hydrangeas out in our garden typically. My hydrangeas all have hollow stems, and we have purposely left them thinking, I've actually seen somebody emerge from one. I did not identify it. But is that what we're talking about? Is those types of stems, or is it specific shrubs that the bees are drawn to, or is it just any hollow stem, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I do not think that they are specific to the stems that they nest in. I think that anything that's the right size, depending on the size of the bee, and is hollow or, with a pith in there that they can pull out to put their eggs in there.
Right.
I grow these huge prairie plants called cup plants, where the leaves clasp the stem. They're not very good for cut flowers, because the flowers are about this big and the plants can be 7 feet tall. But they have kind of a squared off stem, almost like a mint, but it's big. And I keep looking because I've read that they will nest in there. I've never seen one. The problem is we don't have as many bees as we used to. So watching for things to emerge or looking for emergence holes or nest holes is going to be time consuming compared to the results that you're going to get.
All right. So I have 2 questions thinking about people and marketing that the world has taken up. What do you think about all of these bee nests that they sell, with straws in them and all kinds of stuff? What is your general comment to people about that?
Okay, I'm not going to say I don't like them, because I think anything that people are aware of that makes them more aware of the bees and thinking positive of the bees is a good thing. Now, one thing that they have to know about those bee houses is you just can't use them from year to year to year. You must replace the straws inside those holes. And if you don't have one that you can do that with, then you're going to get other things nesting in there besides bees, but you're also going to get parasites of the bees. And so if you don't replace the nest straws annually, you're probably not helping the bees at all. I personally don't use them. I've now got 3 that people have given me, and I carry them around to show people at educational events. But bees didn't evolve with little wooden houses. So
They didn't.
I'm an ecologist at heart, and that's what my degree is in. It's actually in ecology, not entomology. And so I apply the ecological principles. I like the diverse garden. I like the natural and native garden. and bee houses, they can help if you're doing it right, but you really have to be on it. You have to do your research about how to use it, where to put it, and this sort of thing.
Okay, and so here's the other question that for your explanation of this, because when you said that bees, leave bare ground so they can nest, I know what popped into 99% of people's minds when they heard that is what people call ground bees, which are in fact not ground bees at all, right? Are they yellow jackets? Is that the correct wasps?
There are a number of wasps also. There are sand wasps. There are cicada killers, which are huge. They are probably the biggest wasps around.
I have seen those, but I'm talking about
the yellow
those
jackets
nests.
are the ones people hate because they're so aggressive.
Yes.
You run your lawnmower over one of those nests. Again, they are social, so they're more aggressive, and there are larger numbers of them. And yeah, they can nest in the ground. And that's
so
when people get stung.
They're not ground bees at all.
Nope.
They're yellow jackets, and they're just protecting their family when they attack you, basically.
Yeah. Try putting your lawnmower over a nest.
I've done it. Yeah. So, and that's why I say to people, I was the person that was terrified before I got educated, and once you realize what to do and what not to do and how to help and what they do for your garden.
Yes.
Then it changes everything, right?
A lot of people say, I have flowers on my squash, but I never get any fruit. Well, there's a specific bee that pollinates members of the squash family. And if those bees aren't around, you're not going to have any fruit, regardless of how many flowers you have. So if you use lots of pesticides in your garden, you're doing yourself in.
It's true. I mean, and thinking about the hollow stems, it is so hard, maybe in a front yard, but I mean, it's just so much when you think about how many homes you could be providing by and you can keep the edges of your garden tidy. We're not talking about having a jungle that is unruly that your neighbors aren't going to be happy with. I mean, I've got more watchers than anybody else because my farm's right in the middle of the city, and we make a point. The edges are very tidy, but you come inside and we have huge native borders, and I mean, there's a place for everything, so everybody can add that. So what else do we need to know for people to really embrace and encourage these guys to come to their garden? Anything?
Well, I think just looking closely. I mean, there are some that are iridescent emerald green. There are some that look a little bit like wasps that are bright orange. They are actually kleptoparasites, where they go in and they don't make their own nests. They take somebody else's food, kill the babies, and eat the food. But I think that once you start looking at them and realizing what they do for you, the pollination, we wouldn't have hardly any fruit, any fruits probably without bees and other insect pollinators. Things like corn and grains are wind pollinated, but fruits are not. Fruits are animal pollinated. And in this country, the bees are the main pollinators, although there are other insects. So I think the more you know, the more interest you will have. But I think just even looking at them, some of them are so beautiful. If you're not afraid to get up close and personal with them and take a good look.
Well, I think if I can get up close and personal, anybody can, because I used to really be pretty dadgum terrified. So Barbara, is there a book that you would recommend to newbies for people that might want to try to identify? Or Rhonda, I think Rhonda has a favorite. She's going to show us one while you're getting yours, Barbara.
Let's see what she's got. I've got The Bees in Your Backyard by Joseph Wilson and Olivia Carroll.
She has a stack.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she does.
I didn't get all of them, but here, Xerces Society for Invertebrate, that's backwards, isn't it? The Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation is the mother organization of Bee City USA, which has cities and campuses as affiliates. And Hampton is one of them. I guess Virginia Beach just became another one. They have one called 100 Plants to Feed the Monarchs. I have another one from the Xerces Society called Attracting Native Pollinators.
We have that.
Here's Gretchen Laboon is a scientific researcher on bees, and she did one. She's a co-author of one called The Bee Friendly Garden. But Heather Holm has a number of them. Is that one that I can't remember which one you
I have Heather's book on wasps, I think.
Oh,
But
that's her latest one. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe if Barbara would you mind sending your favorite list of books and their authors to Rhonda, and we can put that in the show notes for people, for them to peruse and see which one fits, where they want to start. Because, as we know, we need them all,
Yes.
but you start with just one usually, and then it just leads you to another one and another one. And we'll put Rhonda's and yours favorite native bee books just to kind of introduce folks to, what to plant and how to, it's the same as with us, right? So you said diversity, we like a lot of different things in our life, and then we need early and late and constant flowers blooming. They need water. They do not need any chemicals in their life, no pesticides, which we're big
Absolutely
about.
not.
And they need habitat, and they need some spaces without mulch so they can get to the soil, right?
Yeah.
So
Spray yourself, not your yard.
there you go. Self-sacrifice. There
That's
you go.
right.
I love you, Rhonda. That's it. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for being here to us today on the Bug Talk. This was really, Rhonda really is a bee nut.
Yeah.
Yeah, she loves bees. I love bees too. You learn to love them more and more the more you learn about them. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. And it's nice to know that you're a local to us. So Barbara is right here in town, well, the city next to us. I'm in Newport News. She's in Hampton, but she's teaching at Christopher Newport University. And welcome to Newport News. And Rhonda, thank you for bringing Barbara into our circle.
For being here, Barbara. Yeah.
Thank
yeah.
you both.
I think we have to have you back and talk about spiders.
Okay.
Oh, I love spiders. I didn't used to.
See, I probably shouldn't talk about this because it's not about bees, but yeah, this morning on my way out the back door, I had to stop because one of it's the zipper garden spider, she had made a web across the back door. So we had to kind of rearrange her and move her to the side. But she was ready to catch, I think, a small dog on the way out.
Oh, y'all, this is what happens to you when you make gardening and farming such a part of your life. Easily distracted by bugs is what Rhonda's shirt said. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate you and all your work so very, very much.
Thank you.
And thanks, Rhonda, for joining us.
Sure.
And friends, if you're enjoying the podcast, it helps us so much if you give a review on whatever app you listen to your podcasts on. That helps them show our podcast to more people. And if you want to learn more about the Gardener's Workshop and the work that we're doing, head on over to thegardenersworkshop.com, and we would love to meet you there. Until we meet again, friends. Ciao.
Bye-bye.